Hello, everyone. I'm Nicole Gabriel, grassroots organizer for the Wisconsin Fair Maps Coalition. Welcome back to Fair Maps Forward, the leader in the fight against partisan gerrymandering. Today, we will explore the political and economic challenges facing society with our special guests.
Hi, everyone. I'm Molly Carmichael. I'm the Communications Director with Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, and today we're joined by Emma Johnson, Theo Mosley, and Robert Mosley. I'm hoping you guys can just one by one give us a quick little bio and tell us about yourselves.
Hi, I'm Emma Johnson. I'm a sophomore at Ripon College. I'm a double major in psychology and political science with a minor in French. I'm the current social media coordinator for the Brad Smith campaign, a Democrat running for congressional office in Wisconsin's 6th District. I enjoy representing the class of 2028 for Student Senate, reporting for the school newspaper, and playing for Ripon College's flag football team.
Hi, I'm Theo Mosley. I'm a sophomore at University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh. I'm majoring in environmental studies and minoring in psychology. I'm in Wisconsin Wildlife Conservation Club, and I'm part of the LGBTQ community, and I am passionate about advocating for others.
I'm Robert Mosley. I'm 24 years old and high school graduate. I did a year of volunteer work in New Orleans from 2024 to 2025. I have a variety of work experience. Currently working as security for a hotel. I enjoy listening to horror audiobooks and reading horror books, playing video games, and volunteering in my community.
Okay, awesome. Well, it sounds like we have a lot in common, Robert. I also really like horror and video games and also listening to audiobooks. And it was really nice to get to know you guys all a little bit more. Thank you so much for being here, by the way, and just dedicating some of your time tonight to talk to us about Fair Maps. We're really interested in getting a Gen Z perspective because we haven't done a lot of outreach or speaking to, the younger folks. So we're just really excited to get your perspective and see, how we can get Gen Zers more engaged in the Fair Maps movement and just what kind of issues are more important to you or most important to you, sorry. So I'm just going to start with asking you guys a three-part question. So could you please tell me how you see yourself and your Gen Z peers relating to politics and government? How engaged are you and how engaged would you say your friends are?
For me and myself, relating to politics and the government, I can say we are very, very critical of the government and very dissatisfied with the current administration and for the administration for just in general for quite some time now. Um, how engaged am I? I wouldn't say especially, I'm not doing sort of any like canvassing or going out there and getting people to vote. But I do keep up and I'm current with what everything's going on, relatively so. Um, and how engaged are my friends? It varies. I know one of my friends. He's very, very, very big into that. He listens to I think it's the Blowback podcast. And well, he is a sociology major, so he is very, very, very much so into everything that goes on via politics.
I think that most Gen Z definitely varies, but I do think that we are very passionate about not being on the wrong side of history. Some very much lately. Um, I'm not fully engaged with all that is going on the news. Similar to Robbie, that even though I'm not fully engaged, I still see it on like my timeline every once in a while, and I um am very, I suppose, enraged with what's going on in the world, and how engaged my friends are also varies, but they are similar to me.
I think to bounce off of what everyone else has said, that I'd say myself and my Gen Z peers have found ourselves becoming disengaged and engaged with the system, depending on how much it's given back to us. I think with politics as a poli sci major, I've become immersed in the world of politics, and I can be the sole person that's talking about what's happening on the news and what's going on within the world of government. But simultaneously, when there's an election cycle that rolls around, you start to see people become a lot more engaged. And I think recently we've seen Gen Z start to care a lot more about the local elections, more so than national elections, because there's a sense of what's happening at home hits a lot more harder than what's happening on a national scale. And I think that's especially more prevalent today than what it has been in the last couple of decades. And my friends are only as engaged as the people that reach out to them. So I think it's always a step forward when you start to see representatives or even candidates come to college campuses or start to put ads that are targeted toward the college age students and even high schoolers, because I think people forget that lost demographic of 18 years old.
Yeah, people that are going to be of voting age soon. Well, I love that we have people from kind of that have different levels of political engagement in this group. I feel like that's probably representative of Gen Z as a whole because like you guys said it's, it depends on who your friends are and, what they're interested in and that determines their level of engagement. Um, so I guess the next question is it's from Molly.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing on that. And so when it comes to getting information, whether you are seeking it out purposefully or just passively coming across it, where do you mostly get your news? What platforms, creators, what sort of style resonates most with you? And maybe for this one, we can start with Emma and go in the other order.
Sure. So I think I grew up a little old fashioned with my father still receiving the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times delivered to our front door. And that's been something that I've tried to carry with me, receiving both sides of different sources. And I think that's really helped me have a different upbringing necessarily than we've seen print media kind of go out of style. But for a lot of my friends, we are fortunate enough at Ripon College to have a free subscription to the New York Times through our .edu. So we've seen an uptick of people having their information through breaking news that way, whether it's straight to our email address. But for me personally, I've definitely been in that Gen Z stereotype of scrolling on social media through Instagram or TikTok through those different creators that are quite literally completing those on the boots or on the ground journalism, because they have eyes and ears in places that we can't possibly see or that mainstream media isn't covering. But I think that politics comes up in regular conversations with different mainstream events, with different things that are kind of going along with what has occurred in the world, but it also is what's happening locally too. I think that unfortunately, it's not until something happens near and dear to you that you start to care a little bit more, or you start to look for those names that matter more in the news. And so that's where I've found myself having some of those harder conversations with friends, because you start to realize there's a quote that it's not until they come for me that I start to realize that there's no one talking for me or standing up for me.
For me, I usually fortunately get my news online from social media. Um, TikTok very much is more on the grounds type of videos, which is very, very much compares to like other social media platforms, and it is helpful because I don't really read physical newspapers. Most people don't really read it, so it's easier to get news online compared to you know the old newspapers.
I can speak for myself with how I get news is, again, kind of going off of what Theo said, primarily through social media, kind of also through word of mouth. I do work third shift, which tends to mean I am, you know, kind of out of the daily loop for a lot of people. So my friends will usually, message me about something. usually cracking a joke about something that happened in like politics or something like that. And that's typically how I find out. And then I hop on social media, typically TikTok, and find out more details through that. As for how they get the news, I would say primarily also through social media. Um, I'd say I do know two of my friends like kind of not religiously, but listen to NPR quite frequently, and I'm assuming that's where they get most of their information from. Um, yeah, how often politics come up in regular conversations? I would say pretty frequently. Like as I kind of said before, we kind of crack a lot of jokes regarding that. So um, it's it's mostly kept as lighthearted, because if we look into politics too deeply, we tend to get pretty down and pretty angry. So it's kept pretty lighthearted.
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely you have to have a balance between understanding what's going on and also keeping yourself mentally healthy. Um, so, here at the Wisconsin Fair Maps Coalition, we're working on a permanent solution to end gerrymandering in Wisconsin. What do you guys know about gerrymandering?
I know it's practice used to you know divide up voting districts, and it's typically used to suppress. It's kind of used to take away like critical parts of like critical like voting members of like communities, and kind of basically flip sectors over from red to blue or blue to red or vice versa, stuff like that.
I'll be honest, I don't really know much about it, but I do know it is very.
I think that's probably common. Like, that's probably how most people feel about gerrymandering. Like they might have heard the word before and they know that it's a complicated topic with a lot of mixed feelings, but they don't know the specifics behind it. Like when I've talked to people, for tabling or for outreach, I find that that's probably the most common place for people to sit in terms of gerrymandering. Would you say that's kind of accurate? Like you've heard the word before and like you have a general idea of like, the fact that it's a controversial issue, especially nowadays with what's going on with the gerrymandering sort of arms race between Texas and California and those other states.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard it before, but I don't really know the meaning and context behind it.
Mm-hmm.
I recall being taught it in one of my high school history classes, where I think it was the fact that it was the form of a salamander and the man's name was Jerry, and so that's how we got the name gerrymandering. So that always stuck out to me, but I think in recent modern history, we've definitely seen how the Supreme Court, I think, ruled on it in North or South Carolina initially, and then now we've seen it in, as you already stated, Texas and California. And so I think, especially with Gen Z, there's almost this sense of what can I really do about it, just because there's so many different decisions out there, and it's almost this sense of, okay, it's up to the elected officials, but we can learn about it in a history class, but honestly, what's up for us to decide, because eventually it's redrawn and then it's redone and then it's up to the Supreme Court. So it kind of can be such a foreign concept to even myself included.
Yeah, and that kind of reminds me of what you guys were saying earlier about how there's different levels of engagement in terms of, how much people like your age interact politically. And so, there's so many different topics and issues to care about. And it's kind of like, how do you decide which one you want to learn about and which one, you should care about and dive into? Um, and before Molly asks the next question, I just wanted to do a quick correction. So, you guys, we're pretty much spot on with what you know about gerrymandering, but I just want to point out that the governor's name was actually Gary, not Jerry.
Gary. Oh,
Yeah, funny enough.
Thank you for that correction. I totally forgot about the salamander story. I remember learning that in high school or college, and I kind of feel like we need like a t-shirt with a salamander on it, even though we're obviously trying to end gerrymandering. I always like a mascot. And Nicole, before we get into the next question, not to put you on the spot, but you are like Nicole goes around the state giving presentations on fair maps and gerrymandering. Would you be able to give like a 1 or 2 sentence definition of gerrymandering just to level set?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, gerrymandering is, I think, in the most simple way that I can explain it, gerrymandering is when politicians rig our voting maps to secure a partisan outcome for specific candidates or excuse me, or a specific political party.
And I'll also point out there are the most common gerrymandering we refer to is partisan gerrymandering, so Republican versus Democrat, but there are also some other ways that you might see politicians gerrymander. But essentially, it's voter suppression. And that takes us into another fun definition we'll get into for the next question, which is something called an IRC. So here at the Fair Maps Coalition, we're working really hard to pass legislation in Wisconsin to establish something that we call an IRC because the full name, Independent Redistricting Commission, is not very catchy and doesn't really fit on social media and graphics and stuff. So we're going with IRC. But essentially, this would be a group of citizens that are representative of Wisconsinites, so spread throughout the state, having diverse political ideologies. And these folks, with the help of, expert consultants, so mathematicians and stuff, would be in charge of drawing our maps. So for state assembly, state senate, and Wisconsin's congressional representatives, those maps would be drawn by this commission rather than what's happening right now, which is it's drawn by legislators in whichever party is in power. So most recently, it was drawn by Republican legislators, and it was given an F grade for unfairness. And so the entirety of, I think, most of our lives, actually all of our lives, Wisconsin has been gerrymandered. And so if we had a system in place to end gerrymandering, to put that map drawing power back into the hands of citizens, how would that affect your outlook on Wisconsin and government and the sort of attitude you have now? Because I totally get what everyone's saying, where it's easy to be disillusioned. So do you think if this process was different, how would it affect your feelings?
Personally, in my opinion, I disagree with kind of the Electoral College in general on this sort of deal. I think votes should be sheerly a vote of popularity, and just volume of votes should go to counting towards, who does what. I don't really think there should be districts. But that's just my personal opinion.
I think to kind of hone in on even what we've seen within this call, I think there's still some parts of gerrymandering that I don't understand, and I'm sure there's still so much of what even people in Wisconsin don't know. And I think that even if we were to have this passed by the legislator, that the perception of gerrymandering still would be up in the air, because would people really understand the significance of it? So I think just the idea of having that constant education of it would be important, because that would help change my ability to view our government if I really understood the magnitude of, say, the corruption, or say why the history of it has been exclusive to a certain district. And so I think that would help get more support behind it and help elicit more of a public reaction to why this is so important, and even say in the United States. Because I think unless there's like a big emotional tie to it, people will say, well, there's more pressing things in my life. Say, why can't I get food on my table? Why am I not making as much money? And so I think once we can draw a lot of different connections to it, realistically, for me, a college student who has grown up in a different state and is just coming here in Wisconsin and has my voter registration here, I can go about my everyday life. So I think that it would definitely be interesting to see that my perception realistically of the government wouldn't change that much, but with more education on why this is so important and why this would actually affect my life as a college student, I think that could be really transformative.
Yeah, definitely. It kind of reminds me of what you said earlier about, oh, sorry, I think the quote, Emma, was you don't know what people don't tell you, or like you only know what people go out and tell you. Like if you're not educated on it, then you're not going to have any idea on the significance on what that kind of reform would mean. And also thought it was really insightful that you mentioned like having tying it into the emotional connection. Like why is gerrymandering stopping certain people from being able to put food on their table instead of just kind of talking about like this maybe nebulous idea of voting maps, like maybe trying to focus on the emotional impact and how it directly affects people is a great way to, not get not just Gen Zers, but people in general interested in the topic. So thank you for that.
Yeah, that's really helpful to hear. And I think one thing we try to do, but maybe, this conversation we're taking away that, especially when talking to younger voters, we have to do more is we ask, maybe we should have opened up this way, like, what issues do you care about? Because a good chance is that, you want clean water, higher wages. Those are very popular issues that we can't get here in Wisconsin. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that politicians draw themselves into power and they don't have to listen. And so, maybe that's how we should have kicked off this conversation. Maybe Nicole, if you want to go to the next question, then we can kind of draw those lines a little more clear.
What topics are you most compelled by? I think, this also leads into the next question. Yeah, of, what is your relationship to voting and what issues specifically do you think would compel you to go out and to vote?
I mean, kind of like what you said. I think you mentioned, increased wages. That's definitely. I think I speak for pretty much everyone when I say that's probably at the top of the list for Gen Z. I have a big long list that I'm just going to kind of rattle off a couple of. So, increased wages, funding into actual public services such as buses and trains. Um, actual help for programs of addiction, actual programs for help for addictions, um, legalization of recreational use of marijuana, denounce the genocide in Gaza and move to do tangible boycotts of Israel, um, increasing budgets for public defenders and working to expand them. I can kind of go on and on. I have a lot, but those are kind of like the main points for me.
My big issue with voting that I like similar like I want changed is like with better education, like the importance of like human rights in themselves, like especially people of color, they should not be they should have the same rights as everybody else and shouldn't be arrested in the streets as and I also that trans and queer people should have the same rights as everyone else because everybody is human. Everybody came from the same continent, and I don't know why we are the way that we are right now. And as well as stopping stripping rights for from the basically environmental endangered species acts and stripping the natural resources that are needed in the world.
Yeah, I can rattle off a couple, but I don't want to keep us on call all the way to seven. But I think that a couple issues that always hit home for me, I'm a daughter of a veteran, so I always am drawn back to putting a lot more resources and allocating more funds for our VA. I think that it's been a disservice to see how many veterans go homeless every year, and I think that that can be something that is more done more diligently. I also looking into our national parks and how much those employees have been put under attack in the last year. I think that looking at the allocation of funds under Doge has been very intriguing, and I think that kind of reanalyzing exactly everything that's happened in the last year, I think that there's definitely a need to kind of check that. And I think it speaks greater to Gen Z and how there's an amalgamation of different issues, but something that kind of unites everyone is we are always in love with a good fact check. And I think that this last administration and even the previous administration, we've seen a lot of things that haven't lined up necessarily. and different facts and different points of information that aren't corresponding with what we've been told. And so I think that those issues are kind of what even creates these different points of contention where Gen Z doesn't want to get politically engaged anymore because they see it being a divisive point with families, with friends, even in colleges. So I think that's what kind of scares people from even having these kind of conversations where they say what issues they care about, because you put it one way, you could be put as far left, far right, and I think a lot of people are feeling more confident to say that they're independent or centrist because it's a lot safer nowadays.
So, what I'm hearing is that there's a mix of concerns from you guys on both the state level and also the federal level, and that you guys are concerned about issues that not only impact you directly, but I think I heard Theo talking about human rights and just wanting things to be more equitable for, your neighbors and just everyone in the state, and just wanting, like more fairness regardless of like whether or not it impacts you directly. So I just want to explain how gerrymandering does impact who represents you at both the state and federal level. So when the legislature draws our voting maps, they're manipulating the maps for three different kinds of election. So they're manipulating the maps for who gets elected into the U.S. House of Representatives, the state Senate, and the state Assembly. So the main issue with gerrymandering is, on top of cracking and packing various demographics and diluting their votes, diluting the votes of communities of interest, gerrymandering also makes it so that our politicians no longer have to be held accountable to the needs and the wants of their constituents, like you guys. Um, because instead, when they create safe seats for themselves and for their parties, instead they're mostly held accountable to their personal agenda, their party agenda, and then, of course, to their donors as well. So, what we've seen is that I've actually got one of our brochures on here. We've done some research and then found that, I heard you guys talking about the environment and wages. And over here it says that 87% of Wisconsinites, oh, excuse me, 76% of Wisconsinites want increased renewable energy efforts, 67% want marijuana legalization, and 57% want an increase in minimum wage. And that's regardless of where they sit on the political spectrum, so Democrat, Republican, or something else. And it's just astounding that we can agree on these things, as a whole, and yet our politicians are still not passing the kind of legislation that the majority of Wisconsinites want to see. And again, that's because when they have drawn safe seats for themselves and for their parties, they no longer have to worry about, what you guys want and what the rest of Wisconsin wants as well. So I was able to give you guys a better understanding of how gerrymandering impacts the kind of legislation that gets passed on both the state and federal level.
Yeah, and thank you all for sharing. I feel like listing off things that we want is sometimes like a good exercise in remembering like what we're fighting for and what we can work toward. I know sometimes I get stuck, especially Wisconsin Democracy Campaign deals with money in politics and corruption, and that can be a real rabbit hole. And so sometimes listing off like, these wonderful things that we will one day get and we'll work toward can be a really great way to stay energized. With that, we have one more question, and you might not have an answer with this one because it's kind of a tough one. I don't know if I have an answer, so we can work through it or skip it, whatever feels right. But for people your age, when you're talking with your friends, peers who feel frustrated, who feel, disillusioned, which we've been talking a little bit about today, what would you say to them when that comes up in conversation? Like if you are trying to energize them, what do you say in response to that? How do you personally keep going?
The way I get involved is, like I said, volunteering. I've helped out at my local food pantry. I'm currently in my church. I am a session member, which basically means I plan out a lot of what happens. And through that, I'm slowly but surely making progress towards building a community garden. That's kind of how I give back, is volunteering. I don't, for me, I view words as cheap and actions, truly do speak a lot louder than words. As for how I keep going, just gonna be completely honest, straight up hedonism. Um, like recreational drug use, excessive drinking, partying, straight up, or fantasy escapism, which is a big deal on why I'm into Dungeons and Dragons. As for my tips on, how to feel better, it may not work for everyone, but volunteering, helping out. For me, like I said, I did a year of volunteer work down in New Orleans, and that helped me out immensely, mental health wise. Every day is a struggle, but just being able to tangibly see the good you are doing in a community is very, very helpful.
Like similar to Robbie, it's so important to build bonds and connections in a whole community, even when times are tough, and to just never and focus on the positive things than the negative, and that eventually that things will work out, and no matter what. And it is hard to have hope, but you have to at this point.
I think for me, when trying to find people who have lost hope or are disengaged with anything that's politically related, I always try to find the middle ground with them. I think that growing up as a military brat, I've been placed in a unique situation where I've grown up in a little bit of everywhere across the United States, and I've been able to find common ground with a lot of different people that I've grown up with, and especially spending the last 6 years in Wyoming. You find a lot of different similarities with people that are on the completely opposite side of the aisle that I politically align with. But you still realize that everyone goes home, everyone has their same day to day that they have to do. And truthfully, there's some things that within politics that you realize it's not worth it, and that there are conversations that you just can't have with people. But there are things that aren't politically divisive, such as gerrymandering, where you can say, look, this overarches anything that we can possibly talk about, that it intersects every facet of your daily life. You can't go without gerrymandering. It's going to be there. And so I think that's where having those conversations, I'm definitely a little bit more outgoing, so I'm not afraid to have those conversations with people. But I think simultaneously, it's important to realize that, like what Robert was saying, sometimes it's those actions, sometimes it is showing up and volunteering and doing kind of that grunt work before you can have the words do it for you.
Thank you all so much. Emma, Theo, Robert, thank you all so much for your time. And thanks to everyone listening.
Okay, thank you again. Really appreciate you guys taking your time to, join us tonight and talk about this issue. So everyone that's listening, please email your comments to Nicole, that's NICOLE, at fairmapswi.com. We plan to read your emails on future shows as time permits, so please keep them clean. And go ahead and visit our website, fairmapswi.com, and follow us on Facebook.